Kinsey didn't flinch. His intent was earnest, his focus unyielding. But he paid the price long before his groundbreaking research began. And I've been thinking about that for months, because the more I study Kinsey, the man and the mission, the more I see his work not as a scientific breakthrough, but as a spiritual purge. His response to repression, to silence. Welcome to the Str8 No Chaser podcast. I'm Kelvin Blunt. And if you read my essay on Substack about Kinsey, it's called The Velvet Rage of Truth, What Kinsey Tried to Tell Us. You already know how much this topic means to me. But today I want to go deeper, beyond the stats, beyond the scale, into the gray area. Alfred Kinsey was born in Hoboken, New Jersey. Sickly child, repressed household, a father who doubled as a strict Methodist preacher, and a self-ordained moral authority. Kinsey married Claire McMillan, his soulmate and biggest supporter. But their marriage had a rocky start. Two virgins, fumbling through their wedding night. No guidance, no language, no pamphlet, just shame and confusion. Kinsey realized that his and Claire's experience was the norm, not the exception. Alfred Kinsey, the most impactful sex researcher in history, was 27 when he first had sex. But what liberated him wasn't sex. It was science. Before Kinsey ever studied people, he studied wasps. Thousands of them. And what he found was that no two wasps were alike. Variation, Kinsey believed, wasn't a flaw in nature. It was nature, as is sex. Nature. By the time Kinsey left... By the time he left entomology and began studying human sexual behavior, he wasn't just trying to collect data, he was trying to answer a much deeper question. Am I the only one? Between 1939 and the early 50s, Kinsey and his team conducted more than 18,000 interviews. These weren't just surveys. There were 300 plus questions, coded, confidential conversations, done by train, plane, car, 14-hour days. They went to bowling leagues. They interviewed Broadway casts, college students, convicts, clergymen, housewives, and yes, sex workers, female and male sex workers. They weren't the majority, but they weren't excluded. They mattered. Kinsey didn't ask who you were. He asked what you did. Long before we debated whether straight men and gay porn were quote-unquote really gay, Kinsey interviewed men who had sex with men and didn't identify as gay. Many were hustling. Some were exploring. Others were just surviving. And of course, male-on-male sex work has been around for 7,000 years. Kinsey recorded it all without flinching. Not to label participants, but to see them, listen to them. He likely provided the first safe space for sex workers. Today, we use terms like MSM, or men who have sex with men, to capture the same complexity. But Kinsey was already there, already asking the hard questions, actively listening to the answers. Sexual Behavior in the Human Male was published on January 5th, 1948. Within 2 months, 100,000 copies were sold, and this book became one of the bestsellers of 1948. The data was seismic. 98% of men masturbated, 68% had visited a sex worker, 37% had had same-sex orgasmic contact. But the results became water cooler talk before it had a name. Barbershops, conference rooms, schools, religious institutions, albeit with cautious whispers. Then came Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, which was released on May 4th, 1953. And challenged the idea that women were sexually passive or sacred or only here to serve the needs of men. Many women hailed the study as long past due. But this should surprise no one, that the Kinsey report on female sexuality proved more polarizing. In fact, the backlash was brutal. Conservatives, religious leaders, and eventually even the Rockefeller Foundation, Kinsey's main funder, turned on him. Kinsey died 3 years later, discredited, depressed, and depleted. 10 years before the sexual revolution in the 60s that Kinsey helped spark. Kinsey's most famous and well-known contribution is the Kinsey scale, ranging from 0, which is exclusively heterosexual, to 6, which is exclusively homosexual, with an additional X for those experiencing no sexual or romantic attraction. We know that today as asexuality. The Kinsey scale, which is really a spectrum, captured and revealed the idea that human sexuality exists not in binary oppositions, but along a continuum, and that most people fall well between 0 and 6. But today, people talk about the Kinsey scale like it's a BuzzFeed quiz. In fact, many have taken a 9-question quiz online asking questions like, are you a 2, a 5, maybe a 3? But that is not the Kinsey scale. Kinsey's actual questionnaire had as many as 300 questions, and interviews took hours to complete. But Kinsey wasn't trying to assign a label that would define us for a lifetime. The scale was behavioral, a sliding continuum, not a fixed identity. In fact, the term sexual orientation wasn't even in widespread use when Kinsey and his team conducted their research. They didn't ask questions like, are you gay or straight? I cannot stress this enough, because if there's any takeaway from this episode, it's this. When Kinsey conducted studies of sexual behavior in men and women, respectively, few of us used or even knew of terms like gay, straight, or bisexual. As we discussed in episode 2 of this podcast, the terms heterosexual and homosexual were coined in 1868. Bisexual was first used in 1892 to define what we know today as an individual attracted to people of more than one gender. And the term sexual orientation was coined in 1931. Sexual identity labels didn't enter the public lexicon until after Kinsey and his team released the results of their studies. But what Kinsey feared, I think, is exactly what happened. We use sexuality labels to box ourselves in, then box in others based on how we see ourselves or what feels comfortable or convenient for us. And then we got cocky and careless. We tell people they're wrong for how they self-identify. We conduct witch hunts on quote-unquote gay for pay models for having the nerve to have sex with men and get paid for it like gay-identified men do. And if you've listened to previous episodes, you know male-on-male sex ain't new. Straight-identified men have been in gay porn since the beginning. And male-on-male sex work is as old as sex work. I'll cover the gay for pay controversy in a future episode. And now, some of us use identity as if it's a religion. We've weaponized the labels, and we lost the nuance Kinsey fought so hard and died to capture. Kinsey's work didn't escape criticism. Not a surprise given his research was the first of its kind. Critics argue that Kinsey overrepresented certain populations, especially prisoners and sex workers, and underrepresented racial, religious, and rural communities. They also questioned Kinsey's methods and motives. But many critics were less concerned with statistical flaws and more appalled by what the data suggested, that male sexuality was far more fluid than suggested or even thought of. Critics today are still unwilling to accept that, and many people. This is where backlash becomes cultural, not just scientific. But Kinsey didn't just spark controversy. He opened doors for future researchers to go farther. People like Evelyn Hooker, who helped depathologize homosexuality, Masters and Johnson, who mapped human sexual response, Fritz Klein, who built a multi-dimensional scale of sexual orientation, Michel Foucault, who unpacked the history of sexuality as social control, and contemporary voices like Marty Klein, Lisa Diamond, Karen G., Rich Savin Williams, Jane Ward, Candace Nicole, Joe Court, Justin Lehmiller, and the Kinsey Institute to this day. Their work continues to challenge the binary lies we've inherited. These aren't just names. They're echoes of Kinsey's Velvet Rebellion. So let's not wait until after they're gone to appreciate and support their work. So what do we do with all this? Well, we remember what Kinsey was actually doing, not liberating us with labels, but loosening the grip of shame, allowing a safe space before we had a name for it. For Kinsey didn't just shake the closet open. He reminded us it was never built to fit all of us anyway. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to check out the companion essay on Substack. It's called The Velvet Rage of Truth: What Kinsey Tried to Tell Us. You'll also find links to the original Kinsey scale, the Klein grid, and some of the other names I mentioned today in the show notes. You can follow Str8 No Chaser on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please share it with others and let me know what topics you'd like to hear in future episodes. And please subscribe to my Substack. The link is below. Until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and expect them to be good to you. I'm Kelvin Blunt. I'll see you next time on Str8 No Chaser.